Hi everyone, and welcome to another one of my videos. This video is an answer or word solutions video. You know that I do two types of video. One is to give you help while you're working through the booklet, and this one is one of my answer videos where I take you through the word solutions. And the idea is that once you get your booklet back, you then use this video to help you with any questions that you couldn't do or that you got wrong, starting from the front. And I know I've said this to you several times, or many times, but please, to get the maximum benefit from this, make sure that you're not writing and listening at the same time. Never be copying and listening at the same time. The idea is that you put your pen down and you just concentrate on understanding. And you just listen to the video and watch what I'm talking about. And then once you've heard me and you think you understand, you stop the video and you have a go yourself. If you need extra help and you get lost halfway through the question, then stop writing and once again watch the video. Obviously, if you watch the video several times and you still don't understand, then please ask me, and I'm always happy to go over the work with you. Paper 1 is a non-calculator paper. It says non-calculator here. I think that that's symbol got missed off on the photocopying, but paper 1s are always non-calculator. So please don't use a calculator. If there's any questions where you are using a calculator, then make sure that you can do those questions without a calculator, because if you can't, then you're just cheating yourself. Now on this booklet, what I've done the answers, but I've also tried to show you where the marks are awarded, and these are what these yellow boxes mean. Okay, let's go on to the questions. So in question 1, we need to find the highest common factor of 12 and 20. So what we need is a way of breaking the numbers down into their factors, and here are two ways. Okay, you can just write out all the different ways of making 12, 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 1 times 3, out of making 20, 1 times 20, 2 times 10, and 4 times 5, and you can see that some numbers they've got in common. They've both got 1 in common. 1's always going to be a common factor. 2 is a factor that they've got in common, and 4 is a factor they've got in common. And 4 is the highest of those three numbers. It's the highest common factor. Another way of doing it is to break the number down into its prime factors. So 20 is 4 times 5, and then 5 is a prime number, so I leave that circled, and now I break 4 into 2 times 2. So 20 is 2 times 2 times 5. And 12 in the same way is 2 times 6, and 6 is 2 times 3, so 12 is 2 times 2 times 3. And you can see that they've both got 2 times 2 in them, which is 4. This way is probably better if the numbers are large. If this number is large, then splitting it into all the numbers that multiply together to make it is going to be tricky, time consuming, and you might miss one, and it might be an important one. On the other hand, if the numbers are small, this is probably the easiest way to do it, because this is a lot of work to do for just small numbers. In B, we have to find the lowest common multiple. That is the smallest number that 32 and 48 both divide into. And one way of doing it is what I've done here. So these are the multiples of 32. So I start on 32, I go up in 32. 32, 64, 96. I do the same thing for 48, start on 48 and going up in 48. And you can see that 96 is the smallest number that appears in both lists. So it's the smallest or the lowest common multiple. And each time you're going to get 1 mark for a process and 1 mark for the answer. So if you just have an answer there of 4, you've got 2 marks. If you haven't got a mark of 4, but you've got a process going on, you can have 1 mark. Question 2 is one of these questions which is actually really simple, but is made more difficult by loads of writing. So 5 schools sent some students to a conference. One of the schools sent both boys and girls. This school sent 16 boys. The ratio of boys it sent to the number of girls it sent was 1 to 2. The other 4 schools sent only girls, and each of the 5 schools sent the same number of students. Work out the total number of students sent to the conference by these 5 schools. So let's look at that school that sent boys and girls. Now the ratio was 1 to 2, and it's important we get that round the right way round. It's 1 boy to every 2 girls. And there were 16 boys. So if there were 16 boys, there need to be twice as many girls. Have a mark for that. And that makes a total of 48 students in total from that particular school. Have a mark for that. And all 5 students sent the same number so the total is going to be 5 lots of 48. Have a mark for that. And 240, final answer, a mark for that. If you've just got 240, have 4 marks. If you haven't, you can pick up these marks along the way. Now, as I said in my help video, it says here the other 4 schools sent only girls. It doesn't matter about that. That is just thrown in to just kind of confuse things. It doesn't matter whether it said the other 4 students sent only boys. You don't need to calculate how many boys or how many girls arrived. It was just a total number of students. You don't care what their gender is. Question 3, you need to work that out in standard form. So write that out and then put the numbers together and the powers of 10 together. 6 times 4 is 24. 8 add 7 is 15. So it's 24 times 10 to the power of 15. And then you need to change that into standard form because remember this number needs to be between 1 and 10. So that's going to move the decimal point one more place, so it becomes 16. 2.4 times 10 to the power of 16. 2 marks for the answer. If you didn't get the answer, 1 mark for having that bit. Probably the easiest way to do this is to write it out as a long number. So 6 times 10 to the 8 is that number, and 4 times 10 to the power of 7 is that number. And if you've done that, have a mark. Add it together and you get 6.4 times 10 to the power of 8. So you add it as a normal number and then you change it back into standard form. Now there are other ways of doing this, and the important thing is you've got a process and you get the final answer. Question 4. Sam rolls a fair dice 150 times. Work out an estimate for the number of times the dice will land on 4. Well, if it's a fair dice, the probability of getting 4, or any number for that matter, is 1 out of 6. And basically what that means is it will happen 1 out of every 6 times, or 1/6 of the time. So if you threw it 150 times, you would expect to see a 4 on average 1/6 of that amount. So it's 150 divided by 6. Have a mark for that if you didn't get the final answer. And if that is tricky, we can divide both numbers by 2 to get 75 divided by 3, and that's easy, 25. Question 5 is a similarity question. So what you're looking for is corresponding sides. They always give us a pair, okay? So this corresponds with that side corresponds with that, and these are the 2 corresponding sides that we know. And we use those to find out what the scale factor is. 12 divided by 8 is 1.5. And that tells us that all the sides of this triangle are 1.5 times bigger than the sides of this. So the side we need, which is BC, is going to be 1.5 times bigger than that. 1.5 lots of 14 is 21. So 2 marks for 21. If you didn't get that, 1 mark if you can see 1.5 on your work. Question 6. When you're adding fractions, you need to make the denominators the same. So I multiply that by 5, top and bottom, and that by 3, top and bottom. Okay, 1 mark for changing the question into 15 on the denominator, as long as one of these numbers here is correct. Okay. Once the denominators are the same, add the numerators, 11 over 15. Never, ever, ever, ever add the denominators. So 11 out of 15. To multiply these 2 fractions, you change them both into vulgar fractions, or top-heavy fractions, improper fractions. Okay, and that basically means you just change it as a fraction, and usually the numerator is bigger than the denominator. 2 whole ones are 8 quarters, plus 3 is 11 quarters. The quick way is 4 times 2, 8, add 3, 11. In the same way, 5 times 1, 5, add 3, 8. Now that you have them in this format, you can multiply. 11 times 8 is 88, 4 times 5 is 20. Then cancel down. You can see that both these numbers are multiples of 4, so divide by 4 gives you 22 over 5. Okay, and then you change that back into what's called a mixed number, a whole number and a fraction. If you have 22 fifths, that will make 4 whole ones and 2 fifths left over. So you will have a mark for doing that, a mark for getting that answer, and a mark for getting one of these 2 answers here. Okay. Solve the inequality 3t plus 1 is less than t plus 12. The way to solve this is just to think of that as being equals. Okay, if that had an equal sign, you could solve that equation, and you would solve it this inequality in exactly the same way. So however you would solve this, if it had an equal sign, you do the same thing. I take the t over to here, it becomes minus t. And the plus 1 over to here, it becomes minus 1. You might like to think of it as taking 1 from here and taking 1 from here. Taking t from this side and taking t from this side. Whichever way, you get 2t is less than 11. And therefore, t must be less than 5.5. 2 marks for that answer. If you didn't get that answer, 1 mark if you've got that. Now, t is a whole number. Write down the largest value of t that satisfies that inequality. Now, this inequality is the one that you've solved up here. And we know that t must be less than 5.5. Well, if it's a whole number, and it's less than 5.5, the biggest it can possibly be will be 5. And you have a mark for that. 1 mark only. Question 8. The distance from Catesby to Drone is 45 miles, and the distance from Drone to Elton is 20 miles. Colin drives from Catesby to Drone, then he drives from Drone to Elton. Colin drives from Catesby to Drone at an average speed of 30 miles an hour. He drives from Drone to Elton at an average speed of 40 miles an hour. Work out Colin's average speed for the whole journey from Catesby to Elton. So it's another one of those questions where we're working out speed and distance and time. And they started off being quite generous by giving you a diagram. And the first thing I would do if I was doing this question is I would put this information into the diagram so I can see more clearly. And if they don't give you a diagram like this, draw one out. If you think it makes you stupid, okay, it doesn't. Or if it does, then I'm stupid as well, because I need a diagram when I'm doing questions like this. It really helps me. And when we have the information in a diagram like this, we can see what we need to do. To work out the average speed, I need to work out the total distance and the total amount of time it's taken. Well, the first thing is easy. 65 miles. I said you get a mark for it. Actually, I've double checked. You don't, because it's so easy, you shouldn't get a mark. It's just 45 and 20, and the total distance is 65 miles. And we need to work out what the time's going to be. Well, how would we do that? Well, this journey is 45 miles, and we're driving at 35 miles an hour. So the time is going to be distance divided by speed, which is 45 divided by 30, which is 1.5. 45 is 1.5 lots of 30, so it's 1.5 hours. And from Drone to Elton is a distance of 20 miles, and we're driving at 40 miles an hour. So 20 divided by 40 gives us a half. Or you can think of it this way. You can think, okay, well, if I'm 40 miles an hour, I do 40 miles in every hour. So in half an hour, I do 20 miles. So the total distance is 65 miles, and the total time is 2 hours. 1 mark for writing 65 divided by 2, and the last mark for getting the answer of 32.5. Okay, factorise x squared minus 49. Now this is what's called the difference of two squares, because you've got x squared take away 7 squared. And that factorises in a regular kind of way that you should be familiar with, x plus 7, x minus 7, because 7 is the square root of 49. One is plus and one is minus. So in the same way, if you had x squared minus 25, it would be x plus 5, x minus 5. X squared minus 100, x plus 10, brackets, x minus 10. Each time it's the square root of that number. 1 mark only for that. Expand and simplify. Okay, so you need to multiply everything in here by everything in here. 2y times y gives you 2y squared. 2y times minus 3 gives you minus 6y. 7 times y gives you 7y. And 7 times minus 3 gives you minus 21. You get 1 mark if you've got any 3 of these things correct. Now you tidy it up, and it's the y's that can go together. We've got a minus 6y and a plus 7y, and that makes plus y. So 2y squared plus y minus 21 gives you an extra mark. Okay, if you've got that, okay, you've got 2 marks. Question 10. Here are the equations of 5 straight lines A, B, C, D and E. One of the lines goes through the point 0, 3. Write down the letter of this line. Well, the first thing we need to do is write every equation in the form y equals something x plus something. And we normally have an m and a c. Y equals mx plus c. What we mean by that is here, look, y equals 3x plus 4, y equals 2x minus 3. Okay, an amount of x and a number. And these numbers tell us something really important that we need to know. The first number is the gradient. The bigger the number, the steeper the line is. The second number is what's called the y-intercept. It tells us where it crosses the vertical line, the y-axis. Okay? Now, you might be tempted to say that this line crosses at 3, but it doesn't because it's not y equals. Before we can make a decision on where it crosses, we need to write it as y equals. So we divide everything by 3, and we get y equals x divided by 3 plus 1, because it was 3 divided by 3, which is 1. So we can see now that these lines, this one will cross at 4, this one at minus 3, this one at 3, this at minus 4, and this at 1, not at 3. So the one that crosses the y-axis, which is where the x number is 0, at 3 is going to be C, because it's that number there, 3. Two of the lines are parallel. Write down the letters of these two lines. Now, we just said that the x number is the gradient. It's how steep the line is. And two lines are parallel if they have the same gradient. So we're looking for equations, or some equations, which have the same x number, the same amount of x. And you can see that it's B and C. They're both 2x. So they've got the same gradient, they're parallel. Okay. In this one, we've got to factorize this expression. And the way to do it, the way I like to do it, is to look at the numbers, and I can see x's and I can see y's. So I think to myself, right, what is the most amount of x? I beg your pardon, what is the most amount from the number I've got? Well, I've got a 3 and I've got a 6. What's the most they share? 3. Then I look at the x's. There's an x there, there's an x cubed. What's the most they share? X. There's a y squared and there's a y. What's the most they share? Y. So the thing that they share, the most that they share, is 3xy. Now in here needs to be what I need to multiply this by to make each of these things here. So what do I need here to multiply this by to make 3xy? Well, I've already got 3, I've already got x, but I've got a y and I need y squared. So I need a y there. So I'll have 3x times y, 3xy squared. Minus, because it's minus there. Okay, what will I need here? Well, I've got 3xy. I need 6. So I need a 2, so that 3 times 2 makes 6. I need x cubed. I've got x, so I need x squared. So that x times x squared makes x cubed. I've got a y, and I need a y, so that's fine. So this, multiplied by this, makes this answer here. Okay, 2 marks for getting that mark right. Okay, if you have most of those things, say for example you've got 3x and you've got in here y squared minus 2xy, that's 1 mark. If you partially factorized it, if say for example you have 3y and the x is there, so you've got xy minus 2x cubed, have a mark. Finally, if you've got xy and you've got 3y minus 6x squared, have a mark. So if you've got a couple of these things outside the bracket and one of them is inside, have 1 mark. But if you've got that completely, you've got 2 marks. Question 12. I really recommend that you work this out carefully, and you can see what I've done here. I've worked it out on the paper, and I recommend you do the same thing. So, don't try and do this in your head, especially for the negative numbers, and I really recommend you don't use a calculator, because calculators don't like mucking around or calculating with negative numbers. They get confused, or you confuse them. So, when x is 1, we substitute 1 into this expression. We get 1 cubed plus 2 lots of 1 minus 1. Take your time. Don't try and work it out in your head. You'll make mistakes and you'll get the wrong answer. 1 cubed is 1. 2 times 1 is 2. Take away 1. So 1 add 2 is 3. Take away 1 is 2. 2 goes in the table. When x is 0, we'll have 0 cubed plus 2 lots of 0 minus 1. Nothing, nothing, minus 1. When x is minus 2, you get minus 2 cubed plus 2 lots of minus 2 minus 1. This is where we need to be careful with these negative numbers. Negative 2 cubed. So minus 2 times minus 2, which is plus 4, 2 negatives. Then minus, beg your pardon, then multiplied by another minus 2. So it's 4 times minus 2 minus 8. Write it down so you don't forget it, so you don't make mistakes. Plus 2 lots of minus 2, because it's 2 lots of x, and x is minus 2. So it's minus 4. Minus 1 gives you minus 13. Okay, so these are the numbers you should have in your table. You get 2 marks if you've got them all correct. You get 1 mark if you've got 1 or 2 correct. You plot these points on your graph. If you haven't got these points in your table, but you plot what you've done correctly, you still get 2 marks. You get 1 mark for plotting them accurately, and you get another mark for drawing a smooth curve through the crosses. Okay, small crosses or small dots, okay, and a nice smooth curve through them. Don't join them up with straight lines. It doesn't make sense because the dots aren't lying in straight lines. Okay, and don't leave them undrawn because you'll drop a mark. Question 13. Here's some information about 100 students. 60 students study French, 36 study Spanish, and 14 students don't study either French or Spanish. Draw a Venn diagram to show this information. This is what we mean by a Venn diagram. Okay, the box contains all the students we're talking about, or all the things we're talking about, and we have 2 overlapping sets. Now, we've got 60 students who study French and 36 students that study Spanish. Now, if you add this up, you might see that there's a bit of a problem. We've got 60 plus 36 plus 14 is 110. How can that be when there are only 100 students? Well, these 60 students that study French don't just study French. Some of them study Spanish. Likewise, the 36 students that study Spanish don't just study Spanish. Some of them do French. So it must be, if it adds up to 110, 10 students have been counted twice. Once when we counted the people who do French, and once when we counted the people who did Spanish. So that tells us that the 10 must go in here. Okay, so where do the marks come from? You get 1 mark for a pair of overlapping circles. Just doing that. You get 1 mark for putting 14 outside. You get 1 mark for 26, because if 10 is there, 26 do Spanish but not French, to add up to make 36. And you get 1 mark for the 50, because if 10 do French and Spanish, then 50 remain who just do French. And this number adds up to make the 60. You don't get a mark for the box on the outside. It's good to do it, but if you haven't done it, you won't lose a mark. One of the students is picked at random. Work out the probability that this student studies French or Spanish or both. So we need to know what that is. So it's going to be 50 plus 10 plus 26, which is 86. Or simply 100, take away the 14 that don't do French or Spanish. Whichever way, you get 86. And whichever way you do it, you get a mark for that. And the probability is going to be 86 out of 100, which is 2 marks. Question 14. We've got a question involving regular octagons and regular pentagons, and we've got to work out the size of this angle marked X. And it's really important that you explain what you're doing. So what I've done, first of all, I can see right from the start that I need to know what these angles are. This angle here is the angle, okay, that is the difference between the interior angle of an octagon and the interior angle of a pentagon. Okay, if I take this green angle away from the pink angle, I have the angle there. So this is my plan. I work out that angle, that one will be the same, and then I can take those two away from 180 to give me the angle that I need. That's my plan. So first of all, I show the person who's marking this paper that I understand about exterior and interior angles. And I get a mark for this. The exterior angle, the angle outside of an octagon, is 360 divided by 8, because they always add up to 360, and if they're regular, they'll be the same size. That's 45. And therefore, taking that away from 180 gives me the interior angle, and that's 135. 1 mark if you've done that. For the pentagon, it's the same idea, but now it's 360 divided by 5 for 5 sides, which is 72. And the interior angle will be 180 minus 72, 108. 1 mark for doing that. So the angle QEF, QEF, use that angle labelling way, is equal to angle FER, this angle, this pink angle, minus angle QER, the green angle. Taking those away gives me 27. Now angle QFE is the same as angle QEF. QFE and QEF. These two angles on the base of this triangle. How do I know that? It's an isosceles triangle because these two pentagons are the same, so that length and that length are the same. Okay, so taking those two angles away from 180 gives me 126. Now, I get 4 marks for that, but it's important that you show some working out. If you just don't do 126, okay, it says you must show all your working. So you may just get just 1 mark, even if you get the right answer, if you don't show any explanation. If you work out the answer and you get the answer right, you must know what you're doing. Okay, it wasn't by random chance that you got 126. So write in what you are doing. Try and explain. Question 15. The diagram shows 2 identical squares placed side by side to form a rectangle. Calculate the numerical length of the value of the length of the rectangle. Well, the length of the rectangle is 10x minus 2. And it's a square, so that side and that side must be the same. They're identical squares. So in that case, the length of the square is 5x minus 1. Okay, so what's our way in? Well, if this is a square, this side and this side are the same. And so therefore, 5x minus 1, what we've just calculated, and 3x plus 5 must be the same. So, 1 mark for that, writing down your equation. Okay? Then the way I would solve that is I would take that over to there and make it plus 1. Or you could think of it as adding 1 to both sides. And then taking this over to here where it becomes minus 3x. Or you might like to think of it as subtracting 3x from both sides. Either way, you'll get that. If you've got that, you have a mark. And then you solve it, so x is 3. Have another mark. And finally, the length of the rectangle is found by substituting this number into this expression here. So the length of the rectangle is 10 lots of 3, 30, take away 2, 28. And there's your mark. Okay, whenever you see a dash by it, it means not S. So if the probability of S is 2 out of 9, the probability of not getting S must be 7 over 9 because it has to add up to make 1. And you get 1 mark for doing that. Miles puts 3 green blocks, 5 white blocks and 1 pink block in a bag, and he takes at random a block from the bag. He writes down the colour of the block and he puts the block back in the bag. That's important. And then he takes at random a second block from the bag and writes down its colour. Work out the probability that he takes 1 white block and 1 pink block. Okay, well the answer to this is 10 over 81, and you've got that, you've got 2 marks. If not, if there's anywhere where the marker can see 5 over 9 or 1 over 9, okay, then you will have a mark for that. Let's talk about how we get the answer. You can get 1 white block and 1 pink block in 2 ways. White then pink, and or pink then white. So what do we want? We want the probability of white and then pink, or the probability of pink then white. Okay, so pink and, beg your pardon, white and pink is found by multiplying those probabilities together. The probability of white is 5 out of 9, and the probability of pink is 1 out of 9. We want white and pink. So and means we multiply. Okay, or probability of pink and white. So it's the same numbers flipped round. That is 5 over 81, and that is 5 over 81, and we add them together to get 10 out of 81. And then it says at least one of the blocks he takes is white. Now there's 2 ways of doing it. I'll show you the short way and I'll show you the long way. Okay, but the final answer is 65 out of 81. The quickest way to do it is to say, right, if I find out the probability that both of them are not white, then the probability that remains must mean that at least one of the blocks is white. So here is the probability that the blocks isn't white. It's 4 out of 9. Why? Because there are 3 and 1, 4 blocks that aren't white. So the probability of not getting white is 4 out of 9. So the probability of getting 2 blocks that aren't white will be 4 out of 9 and 4 out of 9, so it's multiply, 16 out of 81. 16 out of 81 where both the blocks aren't white. So if I take that away from 1, I get 65 out of 81. That's the probability that at least one of those blocks is white. Now if that was a little bit tricky, here's another way of doing it. It's a bit long drawn out, but you're probably going to have the time in the exam anyway. Just think of all the different ways you could get at least one of the blocks being white. You could have white and green, white and pink, white and white, green and white, pink and white. And each one of those times we multiply the individual probabilities. So the probability of that happening is the probability of white times the probability of green. The probability of this happening is the probability of white times the probability of pink. Probability of white times probability of white, and so on. And because this can happen in lots of different ways, that way, or that way, or that way, or that way, when it's or, we add. So these are the individual probabilities of these different situations, and we add it together because together it is the probability that at least one of those blocks is white. 65 out of 81. Okay, question 17. Summit has a pond in the shape of a prism. There's a key word, really important. The pond is completely full of water. Summit wants to empty the pond so he can clean it, and he uses a pump to empty the pond. The volume of the water in the pond decreases at a constant rate. The level of the water in the pond goes down by 20 centimeters in the first 30 minutes. Work out how much more time Summit has to wait for the pump to empty the pond completely. So what we need to work out is the amount of water in the pond when it's full up and the amount of water that has disappeared from the pond in that 30 minutes. And then we'll be able to work out how much time it will take for the rest of the water to flow out. So it tells us it's in the shape of a prism, and this is the face of the prism, the one right here. Okay, it's a trapezium standing on an edge. If you look at this trapezium here, which is this trapezium turned clockwise, or anti-clockwise, I beg your pardon, you need to know what the formula of the area of a trapezium is. If you don't know that, you're going to be scuppered, so make sure you know it. It's the average of the top and the bottom multiplied by the height. So it's top plus bottom divided by 2 multiplied by the height. Now if we compare this trapezium with this trapezium here, we can see that this is the bottom of the trapezium and this is the top, and this would be the height if the trapezium was turned so that this was the base. Okay. Now we put that in, so the top plus the bottom is 0.5 plus 1.3 divided by 2 and then multiplied by 2 gives me 1.8 square meters. So the area of this face is 1.8 square meters. To find the volume of water, it's going to be the area of the face times the length of the prism. And we can see the length is 1 meter. So the volume of the water in the tank is going to be 1.8 area of face times the length, which is 1.8 cubic meters. Have a mark for that. So we know that when it's full, it's got 1.8 cubic meters in it. Now we need to work out the volume of the water lost in 30 minutes. Well, up here I've shaded it. Now, the depth of the water is 20 centimeters, but all the other measurements are in meters, so I changed that to 0.2 meters. So the volume of the water that I've shaded here is in the shape of a cuboid, and the cuboid is 2 meters long, 1 meter wide, and 0.2 meters high. Multiplying those together gives me 0.2 times 1 times 2, 0.4 cubic meters. Have a mark for that. So 0.4 cubic meters has left in 30 minutes, and 1.8 cubic meters was in the tank to start with. And now we need to work out how longer it will take for the rest of the water to go. So 0.4 cubic meters lost in 30 minutes means that 0.2 cubic meters will be lost every 15 minutes. Now, there was 1.8 cubic meters in the tank, but 0.4 has gone. So now there's only 1.4 cubic meters left in the tank. That's the volume of water from here down. Okay, because this pink bit is gone. Have a mark for that. Now, 1.4 is 7 lots of 0.2, and every 0.2 takes 15 minutes. So it's 7 lots of 15 minutes, which is 1 hour and 45 minutes. Okay, in this question here, if you looked at this and thought to yourself, well, I don't know what the answer to these numbers is, I don't know what the square root of 2 is, and I certainly don't know what 1 over the square root of 2 is, then you know what, that was my initial impression as well. And then I noticed that each of these numbers was 2, and that's the way in. If you write them all as powers of 2, then you can order the powers. So 2 to the power of 0, that's already done. Square root of 2 is 2 to the power of a half. 1 over 2 is 2 to the power of minus 1. That's already as 2 to the power of something. And 1 over the square root of 2, well, the square root of 2 is 2 to the half. So the 1 over square root of 2 is 2 to the power of minus a half. And now you can put these in order. Okay, so that's going to be the smallest. Okay, then this one, then this one, then this one, and then this one. And make sure you use these to put the actual original things in order. So in red is what you should write. This is what you use to put these in order. Okay, so 1 mark if you've shown this method and 1 mark for getting the order right. Give your answer, or we've got to simplify 2 over the square root of 2 cubed. Well, 2 divided by the square root of 2 is the square root of 2. Okay, and we've got to cube that. So it's the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. Okay, 1 mark for doing that and 1 mark for writing that out. Okay, now the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is just 2. So it's 2 times the square root of 2. Okay, and that's your final answer. Question 19. Badly drawn. Make sure you use a compass in the exam. Okay, the equation of a circle is x squared plus y squared equals r squared, and r is the radius. So if it's 4, it must be 2 squared, and so the radius is 2. Here, you need a curve like that. You should know that the cosine of 0 is 1 and the cosine of 90 is 0. And then once you've got that shaped curve that just dips like that and around, okay? And you go up to 360, make sure you got that. Question 20, what we need to do is we need to factorize this, because to simplify it we need to factorize it. We can't cancel out, say, 2x squared and 2x squared there because things aren't being multiplied. So we need to factorize. So 2x squared plus x minus 15, this expression here, that will factorize into 2x minus 5 brackets x plus 3. And 2x cubed plus 6x squared, there's a factor of 2 they both share, and a factor of x squared they both share, so that can come outside. 2x squared times x makes 2x cubed, and 2x squared times 3 makes 6x squared. So that factorizes to that. Have a mark for that, or for getting that one. So 1 mark for factorizing this, and 1 mark for factorizing this and this. How does this factorize? Well, it's going to be a 2x and an x because it's got 2x squared, and I've got 15. I need 2 numbers that are going to multiply to make positive 15. Well, they're adding together to make minus 11, so they must they must both be negative. Why? Because they've multiplied together to make something positive, but when we add them together we get 11 or minus 11. So let's just check. Where's the 5 and the 3 going to go? Well, if I put the 3 there, minus 3 times 2 gives me minus 6x, and minus 5 times x gives me minus 5x, and when I put those together I get minus 11x. So they're round the right way round. So that factorizes to that. Then put this back into here. So instead of writing that, you write that. Instead of writing this, you write that. Instead of writing this, you write that. Okay? And then you can cancel out top and bottom expressions that are the same. So we've got a 2x minus 5 here that will cancel that 2x minus 5. We've got a 2x squared that will divide into that 3x times. 2 goes into 6 3 times. X cubed divided by x squared goes in x times. That x plus 3 and that x plus 3 there will cancel. So what are we left with? That's disappeared, that's disappeared, that's disappeared, that's disappeared, that divided into that, that's disappeared. So we're just left with 3x over x minus 3. So there we are, we've simplified it into this kind of form. Okay, so I've just said I've simplified it. And it didn't ask me, but I've told them that a is 3 because ax and 3x, and b is minus 3 because x plus b, and the number there is minus 3. Question 21. A is the point with coordinates 1, 3, and B is the point with coordinates 4, minus 1. The straight line L goes through both A and B. Is the line with equation 2y equals 3x minus 4 perpendicular to the line? You must show how you got your answer. Well, the first thing to do, or one of the first things to do, is to work out the gradient of this line. Well, it goes through the point 1, 3 and the point 4, minus 1. So I like to plot those points so I can see what I'm doing. Now, if I'm travelling from 1, 3 to 4, minus 1, then I drop a line down here to make a little triangle, and it must mean that I've travelled along 3, the difference between 1 and 4, and I've travelled down 4. That's why that minus is down 4. Okay, why? Because I was at 3, and now when I get to this point, I'm down to minus 1. So that's a difference of 4 down. And the gradient of that line is found by the up number, or the down number, divided by the along number. So it's these numbers in a fraction, minus 4 divided by 3. So that's the gradient of this line. Now, just like in that earlier question about straight line graphs, I want to find out the gradient of this, but I can't say it's 3 yet. I've got to divide everything by 2 to get it in that form y equals mx plus c. I've divided everything by 2, half of that, half of that, half of that, and I've got that. And now I can see that the gradient of this line is 3 over 2. And the question's asking me whether this line and this line are perpendicular. Well, here's two ways of explaining it. The answer is no, but here's two ways of explaining it. First of all, two gradients are perpendicular if you multiply them and you get minus 1. Well, here's the gradient of the line AB, and here's the gradient of the line with that equation. And I can multiply them. And you can see that I'm not going to get minus 1. These 3's will cancel out. I'll get minus 4 over 2, minus 2. Okay, I don't get minus 1, so they're not perpendicular. Another way of saying it is this. Here is a line perpendicular, okay? If this has got a gradient of minus 4 over 3, then the gradient of a line perpendicular to that will be found by flipping this upside down, 3 over 4, and changing the sign from positive to negative, or negative to positive. So the gradient of a line perpendicular to this one will have a gradient of 3 over 4. Okay, I've changed the sign from negative to positive, and I flipped it upside down. So this is the gradient of a line perpendicular to AB, and this is the gradient of the line they gave us. And these aren't the same number, so it's not perpendicular. Okay, I hope that was helpful to you. And as ever, what's we got down here? Here's some marks. Okay, you can see there. 1 mark for getting that equation. 1 mark for finding the gradient of the line AB. 1 mark for finding the gradients 3 over 2. Okay, and 1 mark for the correct reason. So, one more time. 1 mark for changing that to an equation. Y equals 3 over 2x, or 3x over 2 rather, minus 2. 1 mark for a method of finding the gradient. 1 mark for finding the gradients of the two lines. Okay, that equation and that one. And 1 mark for the correct conclusion. Right, I hope that was helpful to you. If it wasn't, if there's any questions you still need me to go over with you, always happy to do it, okay? But the more of these questions you can get, if you can just improve by a few marks here and there on every booklet, you're going to get a great mark. Okay, cheers folks, thank you, bye.